We're all very human and fallible, and yet we live in a society that rewards pretending we're not fallible, or the range of acceptable fallibility is narrow.
We are constantly comparing our insides to other people's outsides and feeling inadequate and guilty, even ashamed.
Trying to blend in means parts of ourselves must disappear, and we must then live in fear that we will be found out.
Here, together, we will create a space where we can laugh, cry, and carry our suffering and hurts lightly.
In the service of being deeply human.
This is Life's Dirty Little Secrets.
The American comic Jonathan Winters once said about his early career, "I couldn't wait around for success. I had to go ahead without it." Self-doubt is pervasive because life is full of uncertainty. Self-doubt is painful because it's linked to our values, to what matters most to us. In this episode, we chat with psychologist Jim Lucas about making room for, even embracing, our self-doubt through the practice of self-compassion.
Here we are today on Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington in Singapore.
And I'm Chris McCury in Seattle, Washington.
And today we have lovely Jim Lucas, who is in Birmingham. And Jim is a CBT therapist who then moved into ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. And he's here today to talk to us about self-doubt. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Wonderful. So I think the topic of self-doubt is so important for me because, obviously in my clinical work, I've been, in and out of clinical work since I started studying probably, 15, 16, 17 years? Even longer probably. And one thing that struck me from very, very quickly is the amount of self-doubt. And I really hoped that with time, it would get better. And I realized that some elements did. Obviously, I felt more confident, but there was always self-doubt. And even over every time I see a new client, I move to a new role, it sort of peaks, and then it might sort of calm down, but it never really goes. And slowly it became apparent that it wasn't going to go. And over time, I've come to realize that we have to make room for this self-doubt if we are to navigate the work that we do. And with ease and almost, maybe ease is the wrong word, with more comfort. Because initially, I remember speaking to one of my first supervisors about it. And he was a fabulous New Yorker. And he said to me, "Don't worry, it never goes." And I thought, oh, no, surely it does. Please tell me it does. And so when I listened to your podcast a few years ago, I thought, oh, how fantastic. We can actually start to talk about self-doubt. We can actually have these conversations versus sort of keeping it behind closed doors in our supervision session when we discuss cases or perhaps in peer supervision. And so, yes, I love the opportunity to think about self-doubt, and obviously not just in the realm of the clinicians. Obviously, that's the job that we all do. But I also thought about it more widely, in the fact that recognizing or being open about things that we don't know, honest about, questions we may have is really difficult. It's something that most of us struggle to do.
Well, if you just think in terms of parenting, there wouldn't be 66,000 parenting books out there if parents were feeling quite confident in what they were doing. So yeah, I think it's pretty pervasive.
Yeah, it's true. In the area of parenting, absolutely. It's almost like in the area of anything that we truly care about, anything that's really important. I'm sure, I don't know how many books there are on relationships, but I'm sure that there's lots of them too. Probably, yeah. And obviously in any of our careers, yes. So I'd love to hear, Jim, from your perspective, what is your sense? How do you see self-doubt in its place in our work, in our worlds?
It's a subject I've been interested in for a number of years. and have spoken on it. And I first became interested in it when a colleague of mine and I decided to put a training workshop together, and we called it our 10 worst therapeutic mistakes. So 10 biggest mistakes we felt we'd ever made in our jobs.
Okay.
That was very brave.
Yeah, right. And the reason that we decided to do that was we felt that most of the training experiences that we'd had really been about how to do this perfectly, or how to be a master of this. And there was something missing. There was something missing about that honesty, about, the day-to-day of trying to do something well, trying to be good at, whether that's being a therapist, whether that's being a teacher or a medic, or whatever it is that you're interested in, that you're just trying to do a good job of. The honest experience for a lot of us is that we're full of fear and anxiety about doing a very bad job of it.
Yes. So true, isn't it?
And so it felt like we just wanted to start to sort of create an opportunity to begin to sort of speak about this.
So true. So refreshing. And it's so freeing, actually, to get to start to speak about it. I found it very validating when I listened to the original podcast you did and the talk that you gave, this idea that actually not only is it important for us to start to speak about our self-doubts and being brave and courageous enough to recognize the areas in which we do feel insecure about, but that actually that very self-doubt can actually open us up to learning new things and exploring, being curious, and actually growing. It doesn't actually shut things down for us the way we feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's counterintuitive. Like, if we're thinking about what is doubt, I think what we're really kind of thinking about is it's when people have uncertainties about things. And, sometimes that could be described as like having a lack of confidence in like your abilities to do something well, or an outcome of something that you're really kind of hoping for. Like, my child grows up well-rounded, or, I do a good job of being a therapist, or those sorts of things. And uncertainty is often treated as something we need to reduce or eliminate. That what we should be striving for is to be confident, because confident equals like something good, confidence equals something attractive, confidence equals something successful. And yet, when you look at it really, I think there are kind of number of problems that arise if we're striving to eliminate uncertainty, just be confident all the time, to have no doubt. I think one is that there many uncertainties you just can't eliminate, can you? Life is full of things that we can't be certain about. And we know it's also a big factor in many kind of long-term anxiety conditions, that when people struggle to tolerate uncertainty, it's such a present kind of factor in why it is that people might be plagued by anxiety kind of long-term. So I think that's one problem with striving to be confident. I think another is not easily acquired confidence. Like, can't just be confident. Yeah. And I think of confidence as being like, well, I get confidence when I've practiced something a lot. Like, it's the product of having practiced and got better and more familiar at something. And also probably a broader sense of self-acceptance. I think I feel a bit more comfortable in my own skin as I've got older, and probably become more self-accepting of like my flaws, my warts, the things I don't like about myself. And clearly not always the case. And, there are spaces and moments where I can see myself losing confidence or feeling less comfortable in my own skin.
And it will depend a lot, won't it, in terms of other factors. Confidence and feeling comfortable in your own skin so many factors can influence it. You're having a bad day, or someone comes along and says something, or you're off, and that can affect your confidence. And yet that doesn't mean that you can't do a good job or a job that's important to you, even without that feeling of confidence.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's easy for humans to get stuck, is that we see the problem being a lack of confidence, and it gets in the way of us then being able to do things like apply for a new job or move location in the world, or, you know, explore a new relationship or hobby. It's like, oh, I'm not confident enough yet to do that. When I'm more confident, I'll then make that first move.
Yes.
And so we start to then try to fix this thing inside of us rather than, and it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, I think. Confidence usually follows some kind of action in that way.
Yes.
With a lot of the teenagers that I've worked with over the years who claim that they're not doing their schoolwork because they lack motivation or they lack confidence, as if these are things that, you know, you either have or don't have, or you have like one leader or you have two leaders or whatever, you know, that and somehow, you know, I have to acquire this and then I have it, as opposed to it's a story that we tell ourselves. And I think it does come from experience. I like to quote a psychologist from the 1940s, a guy named Maurer, who said, "I can act my way into feeling better sooner than I can feel my way into acting better." So yeah, we acquire these things through action, and it's tenuous, it's fleeting.
It really is, because it could be, you know, something happens that knocks our confidence, or things don't work out the way we expected. And that can actually get in the way of us doing something that is important, or us persevering. And that sort of self-doubt or lack of confidence can show up. And that can freeze us. That can actually make us stop and not try, and perhaps hide or not show up. And then we start believing that it really was because of our lack of confidence or lack of skill.
So I go back to my sort of the first half of my 20s. I was kind of mostly single, and part of why that was is I felt kind of very inadequate when it came to dating. Felt like I was just found the whole thing very kind of awkward, and you know, I'd get very kind of stuck with that. When you were just talking about freezing there, sort of that inertia, it just took me back to that, because that's very much kind of what it just sort of felt like I was waiting to no longer feel inadequate, to no longer feel awkward, before I would start to change that. Of course, that's not how it worked. You know, I had to keep feeling awkward in order to, you know, change that part of my life, make it something different.
It's true, isn't it? That waiting, that's so true. That we wait to feel better, or we wait to be less anxious, or we wait to feel more motivated, like Chris was saying. And you know, we can just stay waiting. I think it was Joanne Steinwalk. I can't remember how to pronounce
Steinwalks, yeah.
Steinwalk. He said to me once, you know, life is about, most people think that it's about feeling better, but it's actually about getting better at feeling. And it was so powerful. I think about that awkwardness, that sense of inadequacy, that feeling of being an imposter, that really can freeze us.
Can you repeat that?
So she once said that the work that we do, or in life, what we want to learn is, instead of feeling better, it's actually getting better at feeling.
Getting better at feeling.
Yeah.
Nice.
Most people want to feel better. And yet that's what can get in the way of us moving our lives forward. It's
right.
waiting to feel better, feel different.
Steve Hayes used to say the goal of ACT is not to feel good, but it's to feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. Similar, to feel good. Yeah, exactly. And yet that's so hard for us humans. We don't like feelings that aren't positive and, you know, easy to feel. The ones that are difficult to feel, can really stop us. And I think around performance and our ability to do things, if we do feel incapable or or not good enough or unworthy, or this inadequacy that you were saying, Jim. It's a really tough one. It's a tough one to navigate, because ultimately as humans, we want to feel like we belong and we're doing a good job and we are worthy, and not to feel so is incredibly painful.
Absolutely is. You were mentioning also earlier about then kind of the benefits of being able to embrace self-doubt. This counterintuitive thing that seems to be maybe the thing that gets in the way of that belonging that you were just referring to. And I mentioned earlier that people are, it's interesting, this one, because culturally I think there's this narrative that confidence equals something good, confidence equals something attractive. Yet when I actually looked at my lived experience, I find humility attractive. I find that kind of humble stance attractive. When people are willing to share their vulnerability, their flaws with me, their doubts with me, there's some kind of like, probably at a physiological level, as well as in my head, there's some safety that just starts to sort of occur, where that doesn't occur so quickly or so easily when I'm maybe with somebody who's just showing me sort of a very confident side, where they feel like they know everything there is to know, or that, and they reject kind of any views that are different to their own, or there's never kind of any acknowledgement or recognition of mistake making.
So it's sort of a toxic confidence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's very repellent,
isn't it?
But it is interesting, isn't it, that we don't follow that experience. That experience doesn't lead us doesn't shape our behavior often. We actually continue to think we need to appear confident, we need to appear like we know what we're talking about. And yet, if we ask ourselves, and if we think about what it feels like to be with others who are humble and willing to be vulnerable, that feels so much more belonging, so much more part of the crowd we want to be with. I'm struck by the fact that we still keep telling ourselves we need to feel confident. And yet that is not the thing that helps us. When others show us their vulnerability, we feel more connected. And yet we still have that story in our heads that we need to appear confident and know what we're talking about all the time.
I think there are still many environments where vulnerability is not rewarded. And
True.
Confidence and being sort of strong in a rigid way are rewarded. And I think this exists in many kind of working environments. You can't show you're finding something difficult here.
True, you're right, actually.
You can't cry at work.
True. Yes, it's true. So it's almost that there's different environments call for, I guess I was thinking, I'm thinking about in terms of relationships, in terms of even parenting. It's so hard for us as a parent to say to our child, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that. It's really hard. And yet we want them to say that fairly regularly if possible. But as a parent, it's really tough. And I think there's so many environments, actually. Obviously, work is a particularly difficult one. But, it's tough to say to a friend, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Or even our partners, recognizing those errors, those areas of vulnerability, humility. And yet they make us feel so much closer. But absolutely, there are certainly environments where that would not be rewarded or recognized as a strength.
And yet that humility is so useful in terms of being able to navigate complexity, navigate ambiguity. It allows you to sort of be more open-minded rather than closed-minded, which is so useful for so many contexts, so useful for a business environment where things are complex often. There are ambiguous things. There are different ideas and different cultures going on. in terms of people's backgrounds, that people could bring different perspectives to the table, solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It's beginner's mind, where it's like, I don't know, therefore I'm open to the possibilities and I can think outside the box, or however you want to phrase it. Because I think uncertainty is just, the flip side of curiosity, where, I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm curious about what to make of this and how to navigate and move forward.
Yeah, it's holding the uncertainty, that, isn't it? That kind of a curious response, rather than saying, this, we can't see any pain in your body, so therefore there's no cause to your pain. If it can't be reduced down to something you can find in someone's blood test, then it's a syndrome, or it's an unexplained medically a symptom. I like what you're saying there, Chris, about curiosity, because I think curiosity is a useful part of being able to respond flexibly to things that you experience. Like when I think about psychological flexibility, and I think, when we resist or try to control or avoid things that make us feel uncomfortable, it can usually take us in an unhelpful direction. But that curiosity can just start to, that's a different direction. There might be this thing behind the door that I don't want to think about or feel. But if I can be curious, maybe I just open the door a little to see what that experience might be like, to see what that point of view or that idea or that suggestion might be like.
Well, I tell people that that's, what got us out of the caves.
Yeah.
Was curiosity. People were living in fear of thunder and lightning and eclipses and even the phases of the moon, until somebody said, hey, this is kind of regular, or gee, what's up with that? And they started leaning into it and learning about it and studying it. And then it became less frightening and even predictable. So yeah, curiosity is mostly helpful to lean into our lives.
Yeah, it is true. I'm thinking about sort of the what you were saying, Jim, about uncertainty being so difficult for us to tolerate, so uncomfortable to sit with uncertainty, and how to instead to lean into this curiosity when uncertainty shows up, when we're not too sure about, what's happening here for me, or what should I do about this, to be more curious about that question versus what sometimes can happen where it creates a lot of anxiety. I don't know what to do, and therefore I'm going to walk away or hide or step away.
I think it's a nice starting block, nice first step.
Yeah.
I think we can get stuck with it too, like because it can be, there's a risk also of just using curiosity to try and figure out how do I get rid of my uncertainty?
Yeah.
Kind of needs to be built on a bit as well, with some like, okay, maybe what would it be like to sort of allow this experience? I could notice and describe and make room for this experience without then trying to get away from it. Where might that take me?
Right. Or even just to be able to see it as a thing. Like sometimes, people will tell me in my practice, I'm confused. And I'll say, are you certain that you're confused? And they'll be, well, yeah. And I say, okay, so you're not confused about that. So if I'm absolutely certain that I'm uncertain, it gives you a more metacognitive view of things. So
I wonder if you can talk to us, Jim, a little bit about when it comes to self-doubt and compassion and self-compassion. So I know from our previous conversations that you've done a bit of work thinking about self-doubt and the importance of navigating that with self-compassion. And that's kind of where the magic can happen.
Right. So, what I've spoken about, that's really come out of some work that was done in Scandinavia. And there's a lovely paper that was published about 2015. It's called Love Yourself as a Person, Doubt Yourself as a Therapist. And what this piece of research was about was looking at therapist behaviors, both in session and outside of session, and what effect those behaviors have on whether clients get better, whether they get good therapy outcomes, what difference it makes to a therapist's well-being, and how well they can sort of navigate kind of challenges in communication relationships. And what they found is that self-doubt is very much positively associated with better outcomes in therapy.
Wow.
As long as, yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? And as long as it sits close to that a therapist can practice self-compassion.
It's fascinating, that. It's really interesting. And I guess it does make sense, because if you have self-doubt, but you're incredibly self-critical, it's going to get in the way. With that, what we were saying about this sort of curiosity, if we can have self-doubt and still hold it lightly, then it can move us, because it's obviously something that's important to us. That's why self-doubt matters in a way. When it's something that matters, self-doubt will hurt, because we want to do a good job. We want to be a good parent. We want to be a good partner, good friend, a good colleague. And when we start to question whether we're doing a good job, it is because that matters to us.
Right.
And so it makes sense, I guess, that if we can navigate having self-doubt, being very mindful that it's because we care about this thing, about this person, about this relationship, and that therefore we can move forward with that, with self-doubt, if we hold it in that way, versus if we hold it a stick to ourselves when we do feel this insecurity or anxiety or worry or self-doubt about what we've done. That can actually really freeze us and get in the way. So it makes sense, that research. It does. It's about how we hold the self-doubt, really.
What you're showing there is precisely an example of how to apply self-compassion in practice. You know, can I see myself as a human being here with different roles, different motivations, like wanting to be this or that,
Yes.
and frame my struggle inside caring about those things. And that's a really nice demonstration, I think, people can see of how you might then begin to practice self-compassion.
Because it is so hard, isn't it? Self-compassion is so hard. It's not something that comes naturally to most of us. You know, some of us, it takes us decades of sitting on meditation cushions to actually develop this skill. It really is very counterintuitive to us humans to be self-compassionate.
When I think about my sort of training journey, you know, there was a point where I learned mindfulness work, which I found quite straightforward and sort of a relatively easy ride in terms of practicing and developing that. And then later I started to get into self-compassion, and I found that a much harder road trip. There was resistance, there were judgments going on in my mind about it. And later I think I kind of come to understand that a bit better, and I think something about like doing some self-compassion work is hard because you have to get down in the dirt in order to do it. It's painful work.
Really matter. You have to really be self-compassionate. And in order to really feel that self-compassion, you really do need to get down in the dirt. Otherwise, it won't feel like self-compassion. It has to be from a place that hurts, to be able to show ourselves kindness and to really feel that kindness. I love the way Kristen Neff does self-compassion. And I think that's a conversation in itself, but that sort of recognition that, you know, we are human and fallible, and that in this moment, there'll be many others feeling and doing just like you. And that is, yeah, when I started reading her stuff, I could resonate with why it's useful. It isn't really the first thing I would have thought of doing initially, but yeah, it definitely allows me to carry things more easily.
Right, yeah. And I find that too, you know, particularly around relationships, being a parent, being a partner, being a friend. to, when those judgments or those doubts or those criticisms show up, I've been able to carry the experience of that easier when I've been able to notice me, a person, finding something difficult and being able to hold myself with more warmth and kindness and wisdom.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, so true, so important, and so hard. It's all true. So I think we're coming to the end of our time, which is such a shame. This has been a wonderful conversation. So sort of wrapping things up, we started the conversation thinking about sort of my self-doubt as a clinician and how, I have to, and I still do on a daily basis, learn to navigate it, but actually how self-doubt is pervasive, that humans, we feel this sense of inadequacy and awkwardness or that we're not good enough in so many areas of our life. In fact, it's sort of very much in line with any area that we care about. It seems to be that the more we care, the more likely we are to question our abilities and our worth. And I've really loved thinking about how to hold that self-doubt with more compassion, thinking about being more curious about the uncertainty and what that brings, and what it brings when we do hold self-doubt and a sense of inadequacy more lightly. Actually, how it can open us up to growth, to learning, to, like you said, I loved your story about your early days navigating relationships and how you could sit there and wait for inadequacy and discomfort to leave, or you could move forward and get to those relationships. So that was wonderful. Any final thoughts?
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you. I'm glad we're talking about this. I know you feel it's important for more people to be talking about self-doubt because, then that spreads and that models something. We can start to talk about it. Hopefully that helps others begin to talk about it a bit more too.
Yes. And I think you mentioned in organizations, and I think it is starting, obviously the likes of Brené Brown with her call to courage, asking leaders to sort of talk about this more vulnerability and more openness. Obviously I don't think, we're just at the beginning, but it is spreading slowly, but it is getting to the corners of the world where we're least likely to see it.
Yeah. That's nice to hear.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
And thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Emma.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Life's Dirty Little Secrets podcast.
If you have any feedback for us or secrets for future episodes, you can email us at lifesdirtylittlesecretspodcast@gmail.com.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Life's Dirty Little Secrets or on Facebook at Life's Dirty Little Secrets Podcast.
We invite you to follow, rate, and review us on wherever you listen to this podcast. It is the best way to get our podcast out in front of new listeners.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more.
See you then.